Hey everybody, welcome to this month's Designs for Sport Masterclass. I am super excited about today's guest. Before we get into Dr. Jade and all the goodness he brings to the industry, just some quick housekeeping from Designs for Sport. First of all, thanks for joining our masterclass. If this is your first time, the masterclass is being recorded. You'll get a recording, and then it will also live live on designsforsport.com under education and then under masterclasses. So I have a feeling you're going to want to go back and listen to today's, and you can go through our library. We've had so many calls on business, strength training, nutrition, youth athletes, everything under the sun to help you guys just continue to thrive in your business and grow as people. So make sure you hit that up, check out our podcast, and share with any colleagues and people in the industry that you do business with. I'm not going to take too much of our time today because I want to give Dr. Jade the floor. He has been someone whose work I've been following for quite a long time in the industry. I'm going to read your bio and then tell just like a quick personal story if I can. Dr. Jade Teta, a naturopathic doctor, author, educator, and entrepreneur who brings a unique perspective to health and personal development, is combining 30 years of personal training experience with 20 years of functional medicine, which is a powerful 1-2 punch. And he's going to share some really cool work that he's been up to the last few years, specializing in mindset, muscle, and metabolism. That's like the perfect trifecta. He focuses on a tailored approach to health, fitness, and weight loss. Dr. Teta has authored 8 books in personal development and health, and contributed to key texts like the textbook of natural medicine and integrative sexual health. Currently, he is deepening his expertise through a PhD in transpersonal psychology and a certificate in psychedelic assisted therapy, which I feel like could be a completely other masterclass or podcast. We'll have to talk to you more about that. But quick personal story. So I've been in this industry about 25 years. And when I moved to Dallas about 20 years ago, I wasn't training personal training anymore, just doing functional medicine, nutrition, and a weight loss clinic. But I needed a trainer to train the mostly women I had been working with. And I knew how they had to be trained, but I knew a lot of trainers at the time didn't really know how to train women from an endocrinology standpoint. And so I had a male client who said, hey, my son just finished his internship at SMU. He's trying to build his personal training business. I said, send him in. Let me talk with him. You know, he was green and new to the industry like I was when I first started. And I started my personal training business. And I think our mutual colleagues, Jim, JJ Virgin. So I thought this is my time to like pass it on and do a solid to the next generation of trainers. So he came in and I gave him your book, The Metabolic Effect. And I said, if you train all the women I send you like this book, then you're never going to have to work again because you're going to get great results. And you and I will have like this amazing relationship. So long story short, he killed it. He's thriving. He's co-authored. I just talked with him last week. He's a co-author on a couple of research studies. He's working in sports performance. But your work has many tentacles in the industry, Jade, and probably lots that you don't know about. But that was a pivotal time for me in growing my business here in Dallas, and that particular strength coach and trainer is killing it in the industry now, thanks to learning a lot of what he didn't learn when he was in school through your book. So we're pumped and blessed to have you as a guest on the Designs for Sport Masterclass. I'm going to turn it over to you so I can ferociously take notes and absorb all the goodness that you have. But thanks for being who you are, Jade, and continuing to learn and up level. We're all here to be next level humans, so thank you for your time.
Jill, thank you so much for that. So sweet. Put a smile on my face for sure, and I appreciate that so much. And I'm very excited to deliver this talk because I think it is where the rubber meets the road really when we're going through and working with clients, whether you are a professional or whether you are someone who's just trying to get and stay fit. This information that I'm presenting here today is, in my mind, something that is and should be at the forefront of what we do. And so let's get into this talk. And the first thing I want to point out to you is sort of a new term. And the idea is that our identity is what leads the charge. And so if we're going to change and we're going to make change in our health and fitness, in our finance, in our personal relationships, and in our purpose and meaning, it's the identity that needs to change. And so the first thing that I want to challenge you with, the hook of this presentation, would be, we think that it's habits and behaviors. And what I am going to suggest is that it is not. It is identity and beliefs. And so if we just give someone different habits and behaviors to follow, which in my mind is what the industry tends to do, and we do not adjust the identity and the underlying beliefs and stories that the unconscious and conscious mind are telling, we are not going to be able to make a difference in people's lives and help them change. It is identity and beliefs that make the biggest difference. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how identity is formed. Now, when I was a kid and I was bored in elementary school, there would always be these strings, long strings of yarn sort of on the ground, and I'd pick them up and I'd be bored in class. And so I would tie a knot in that string. And then I would tie another knot and a knot on top of a knot. And I would keep tying them until I had this big knotted piece of yarn. And what I want to suggest is that this is exactly what we do when we are developing as children, as adolescents, as young adults. We end up having things that happen to us. By the way, these don't have to be capital T traumas. They can just be struggles or difficulties or failures, or sometimes confronting a particular fear. And what we do is, because we don't at that time have the experience, the know-how, the wisdom, we end up making what I would call misguided, unconscious decisions. Now, notice the acronym there, misguided, unconscious decisions, MUD. What happens is we have something happen to us that is a struggle, a difficulty, and because we don't yet know how to deal with it or have the experience or wisdom, we make a decision about the world that is misguided because we've never confronted this before, and often unconscious because we don't know that we're writing a story in our unconscious. And when we do this, these stories begin to guide our lives. So that initial knot that we tie in our unconscious becomes obscured by all the other stories that come next. And we end up carrying this knotted, wadded, huge ball of yarn in our subconscious that holds all of our stories, all of our beliefs, and forms the matrix of our identity. And we carry this without being fully aware that we are doing so. And I call these initial knots that we tie in our unconscious seed stories. Now, why do I call them seed stories? I call them seed stories because, like a seed, when planted in the ground, everything else grows out of that. And so if you have this misguided unconscious decision, this story, this choice that you have made about the world, and you're not aware of it, it begins to grow all the weeds in the garden of your identity. And then you become frustrated because when you try to change your habits and behaviors, you constantly are running into these misguided unconscious stories that habits and behaviors flow out of. And so what we need to understand, the first piece of information we need to understand about change, is that our unconscious mind is a conglomeration of stories. And when you combine those stories, these seed stories, this knotted ball of yarn, this becomes our identity and our beliefs. And out of that, of course, flows our feelings. And from that flows choices and actions. And from that flows habits and behaviors. Now, what we do is we focus on the habits and behaviors, the outer shell. And the reason why so many people fail is because what we really need to be doing is focusing on these inner shells, the stories, the identity, the beliefs that make up the feelings, that determine the choices and the actions that give rise to the habits and behaviors. And this is why we see what we see in the research. People who win the lottery usually end up going right back to being at the same financial level or worse than they were before. We know the stats in health and fitness and weight loss, 95% failure rates within 1 year, 97% failure rates in 2 years. Within 3 years, virtually everybody reverts back and gains the weight back. Same thing with personal relationships. Different romantic partner, same patterns. Same thing with purpose and meaning. A lack of meaning, the inability to find purpose, and the struggle. And the reason why is because, in my mind, we are missing the underlying stories, identity, beliefs, and feelings. And so this talk is going to give you an idea of how to begin to restructure the identity. And rest assured, all of us know this, right? Is it normal for someone to defend their identity and their beliefs, or to dismantle them? We all know that people vehemently defend their identity and beliefs when really they should be dismantling them and restructuring them. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Now, first, we have to talk a little bit about why people can't change. And this is why. Because we humans are a conglomeration of all of our psychic entities. The psychic entity that is our little child, the psychic entity that is our adolescent self, the psychic entity that is our young adult self. And these psychic entities are active within us. And so in a very real sense, we are not just walking around in the world as ourselves, we are walking around in the world as a set of psychic entities, emotional responses that have long ago been programmed in us. We are walking around with these misguided unconscious decisions that our child self took on, or our adolescent self took on, or our young adult self took on. And we don't realize that this is like a ball and a chain holding us back. Not only that, what the research now suggests is that we are also held back by intergenerational trauma. If our mother, if our father, if our ancestors struggled through stress, we now know that there are epigenetic changes that also can influence things like our mood, our decision-making processes, our response to stress. We also know that, of course, we pick up habits and behaviors and identity relationships from the people that we are exposed to early on in life, our caretakers. And of course, they did the same with their caretakers, and on and on. And so when we're trying to restructure our identities, we need to understand where these identities are coming from. It's not just about the stories that we wrote when we were a kid. It's also about the conglomeration of all the stories we wrote as children, adolescent, young adults, and then add to that the intergenerational traumas, struggles, ways of dealing, habitual ways of thinking that follow us around and pull us backward. We could also add one more onto this, couldn't we? The cultural zeitgeist in which we are raised, the cultural norms that are around us when we are raised. All of these can represent misguided, unconscious stories, mud that keeps us stuck and unable to make the changes that we would want to make in the world. And so when we are looking to change, what we need is we need to understand all of our parts and integrate all of these belief structures held by all of these different psychic entities. If we can't heal, then we will end up being tethered to old dysfunctional identities. If we can't make sense of certain struggles, then we will be tethered to old dysfunctional stories. We need to look at who we have been, who we currently are, and who we hope to be. And this brings up an idea of authenticity. You oftentimes hear the term authenticity. Be authentic to yourself. But if you're looking at this picture right here, who are we supposed to be authentic to? The little kid, the teenager, the young adult, our current selves? What I would say is that if we stayed authentic to our teenage selves, we would be stuck there. And many people do that. If we stay authentic to our current self, we will remain stuck here. And many people do that. And so who we want to remain authentic to and be authentic to is our future next level human selves, our better selves. That's who we want to be authentic to. And so as we begin to write these stories and change our identity, we need to be aware of all the past psychic structures that make us up, but we also need to project out into the future to our future self. And this is the beginning of the process. Now, in order to get this right, we have to know what these seed stories are, or whether we have them or not. How would you know, for example, that you have a misguided, unconscious decision or a seed story that is keeping you stuck? Well, believe it or not, it's actually pretty simple. When I talk about the metabolism and reading the metabolism, I talk about things like biofeedback signals like hunger and energy and cravings and sleep and mood and exercise performance and exercise recovery. I call this hunger, energy, and cravings, or heck, keeping your heck in check. This tells you if your metabolism is balanced or not. Well, there is a similar way to determine if you have these unconscious seed stories. All you have to do is look at the repeated struggles, recurrent obstacles, and stuck emotions in your life. If you end up having repeated struggles that recur again and again, obstacles that show up again and again, stuck emotions that you can't seem to get past, this is a good indication, a very good indication that you have these seed stories and are dealing with this misguided, unconscious decisions. Now, I want to say something here first about emotions because they're so critical. Whereas biofeedback like hunger, energy, and cravings is feedback for ourselves about our metabolism, our emotions are kind of like the GPS of our spirit. They are kind of telling us about how we orient in terms of our psychology in the world. And there are a few main ones here that I want to address, and each of them come with a set of stories, and it goes by the acronym AFRAID. And so let's go through this really quickly so you can understand what some of these emotions might be saying about the seed stories or misguided unconscious decisions we tell about ourselves. Depression, it's the inability to find hope. Insecurity, the inability to believe in oneself. Anxiety, the inability to make a choice or own a choice once it's made. Resistance is the inability to act or accept something that's happened to us. Frustration, it is the inability to finish or to fully process. And anger is the inability to move on or let go. Now, why did I show that from bottom to top? The reason why is these emotions have depth and they have charge. Depression is the deepest and has the lowest energy. Anger is the most superficial and has the most charge to it. And the reason this is important is because when we deal with depression or insecurity and stories around self-worth and the ability to trust and find hope, it is more difficult to move out of those things. When we are dealing with things like resistance and frustration and anger, it is a little bit easier to move out, but we need to master what I would call emotional alchemy, the ability to move up this chain and out. Anger, of course, is a useful emotion if you can alchemize it into drive and motivation. But the reason I'm showing this is because you can see a set of stories associated with each of these emotions. And keep in mind, we are talking about stuck emotions. We must remember that emotions are meant to be felt, not lived. All of these emotions are just fine, in fact, necessary. But when we get stuck in them, they point to potential misguided, unconscious decisions that we have made. And so if you are someone who is trying to change your life in any way, you want to understand what these stories are. If you are someone who is a coach who is working with people who are trying to change their life, you want to look for these emotions of afraid so that you can spot some of these stories. Now, of course, there are many, many different flavors of emotions. These are just the set of the most common ones that people are dealing with and a set of stories that surround that emotion. But a shortcut to this is that anytime you feel stuck in an emotion, in fact, anytime you feel an emotion, what you can always ask yourself is, what was the story that I was telling myself just before that emotion hit? What is the underlying misguided unconscious decision that is keeping me stuck here? What is the underlying unconscious decision that I am telling myself that keeps me stuck in repeated patterns, that keeps these recurrent obstacles showing up? These are hints that we are stuck. So if you want to know if you have these seed stories that are keeping you stuck, you look at your emotions, you look at your patterns, you look at your recurrent obstacles. Now, what we need to understand is that none of us have really been taught how to deal with mental emotional suffering. We know how to deal with physical pain. We don't necessarily know how to deal with suffering being the mental emotional equivalent of pain. And so as we begin this process, we need to learn how to deal with our suffering. That's what gets us out of these patterns. And so what I want to do first is help you understand how we deal with physical pain. Now, I want you to imagine you're in the kitchen and you're cutting vegetables and your knife slips and you cut your finger. What are you going to do? Well, the first thing that is going to happen is you're going to feel the knife cut into your finger, aren't you? And the fact that you feel it makes you pay attention to it. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab your thumb. Oh, I cut myself, and you're going to squeeze it. And you're immediately going to probably drop the knife. You're certainly not going to continue cutting vegetables. You are going to pay attention and start looking at what happened with your thumb. Then what you're going to do is you're going to inspect it. You're going to see how deep it goes. You're going to say, do I need to get stitches? What do I need to do to clean this and take care of myself? That really is the feel phase, right? When you feel it, you grab it, you stop everything you're doing. And the reason you stop everything you're doing is because you feel what's going on. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to deal with it, aren't you? You're going to bandage it up. You're going to wash it. You're going to apply antibiotic ointment. You're going to take care of this wound. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to heal from it. Now, the heal phase is an interesting one because the heal phase comes from mainly learning the lesson, isn't it? It's not just about letting the wound heal. It's about knowing next time you're in the kitchen cutting vegetables to be more careful. That scar, right, is going to remind you of something. It's going to sting. It teaches you a lesson. You may even go on YouTube or read a book on how to improve your cutting skills. And so when we deal with physical pain, we go through a very intuitive process. First, we feel it, which makes us pay attention to it and deal with it. And then we heal from it, learning a lesson about how to be next time around this injury. If we twist our ankle, we're going to stop running through fields filled with potholes. We're probably going to try to rehab it, right? This is what we do when we deal with physical injuries. This is not what we do when we deal with psychological injuries. So let's talk about the metaphorical psychological thumb. What we do when we cut our psychological thumb is we do one of several things. Maybe we run up to someone, stick our thumb in their face and start screaming, ow, 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 as if they are supposed to solve it. We run around shoving our fingers in everyone's faces, screaming, ow. We blame and complain, right? This is oftentimes one strategy we use when we deal with mental emotional suffering, when we're betrayed, when we're hurt, when we go through psychological trauma. Another way we deal with it is just stare at our thumb and cry. Oh my God, I cut my thumb, not doing anything about it. This would be the whimper and whine way of dealing with this psychological wound. Of course, we can just stick our hand behind our back and act like nothing happened. I didn't cut my thumb. I'm fine. Matter of fact, I don't need this hand. I don't even need this arm anymore. As a matter of fact, I'll just go around for the rest of my life with one hand. I'm fine. And of course, at its worst, what we do is we attack. We become the hurt person who hurts people. So in light of psychological pain, we don't feel, deal, and heal the way we're supposed to. Instead, we blame, complain, whimper, whine, distract, deny, attack, hurt. Why do we do this? Because we've never really been taught how to feel, deal, and heal with psychological wounds. And why does this matter? Because if we can't feel, deal, and heal from the struggles in our lives, from the difficulties in our lives, from the fears in our lives, from the failures in our lives, and yes, even from the big capital T traumas in our lives, then we cannot rewrite these seed stories that are keeping us stuck in the mud. And so how do we deal with this? Well, we have to go back and begin to look at our past selves and all those past wounds and all those emotional responses, realizing that who we are today is a conglomeration of all of our past selves and all of our psychological wounds and all of our misguided, unconscious decisions that we made in response to fear, in response to failure, in response to our struggles. And this has everything to do with simple things like whether we can get in shape or not, whether we will have organized finances and be able to earn, manage, and save money, whether we'll have meaningful and collaborative and connection-based relationships with people, and whether we can find purpose and meaning. So we need to feel and deal with our past misguided, unconscious decisions. And then we need to then go on and heal from them. And the way we do that is to realize that we are a unique purpose, potential, and spiritual fingerprint. There's never been another human like you on the face of the earth, nor will there ever be again. Your pain is a huge piece of the lessons that you have learned and the way that you can teach and create and contribute for others. And this is how you begin to get past these misguided unconscious decisions. Rather than blaming and complaining and whimpering and whining and distracting and denying and attacking, what we do is we begin to integrate these wounds, learn the lessons, and begin to alchemize them into something that grows ourselves, enriches others, and is beneficial for the world. So then the question is, well, how in the hell do we do this? This is where identity restructuring comes in. And I'm going to give you some very powerful tools that you can use to begin this process. It really is a 3-step process here of becoming our superhuman, next level human selves. This identity restructuring is made up of the following. First, we must change the underlying thoughts. We have to uncover, examine, and integrate the hidden seed stories that influence the way we see the world, the way we show up in the world, and the way the world shows up for us. You know, there's one of my favorite quotes is that if you see life as a war, you will find battles everywhere, whether they exist or not. And that is why we must rewrite, integrate, restructure the beliefs and stories that give rise to our identity, that then give rise to our feelings, our actions, our choices, and our habits and behaviors. You cannot just attack habits and behaviors because you got all this underlying weed and root underneath that we must pull up. So we have to change our thoughts. And there's ways that we can do that. Things like written exposure therapy, parts integration work, honor code work, etc. I'm going to give you one tool today that is the most powerful, something called written exposure therapy that can be used for all kinds of things, fears, struggles, etc. And I want you to be careful here because once we get into these conversations, people start looking at this through the lens of trauma, capital T traumas, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, things like this. The truth of the matter is that this stuff works for that, which shows it's so powerful. But it also, more powerfully perhaps, because this stuff is more superficial, works for the struggles, the challenges, the fears, the negative stories that hold us back. So this really is not about trauma. It's about struggles and failures and fears that we have confronted that we've created negative reinforcing stories around. So we're going to talk about how to rewrite that here in just a minute. Now, after we change the thoughts, we have to realize that our bodies, our emotional body, we don't necessarily know what it is like to feel a different way. If you're someone who is stuck in depression, your physiology, your spirit, your biology knows what that feels like, and just like any habit and behavior, is used to it and will naturally go back to it, especially during times of stress. And so what we need to do is practice feeling differently. And this is where things like learning to engage with meditation, specifically visualization meditation and void-based meditation, meditations that get you in a feeling-based state so your body can begin to remember and practice and reprogramming the stuck emotions. Now, of course, after we change the thoughts and we immerse ourselves and practice being in the new feeling, we must take action in the real world. Your brain is watching and judging you all the time, the same way you watch and judge other people. Only with you, it's watching and judging more harshly. If we're going to change, we need to act out the new self in the real world, acting as if, being it until you see it. And that phrasing, be it until you see it, is very important and very different than the common phrasing of fake it till you make it. And we're going to cover that here in just a minute. So let's talk first about rewriting the story. This is the first step. This is changing your thoughts. Now, this is a study on written exposure therapy. Now, we all know and have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. This is a tremendously difficult situation to deal with. It is very hard to deal with PTSD. And in the world of PTSD, there is a gold standard in terms of dealing with people and helping them get through this. And it's known as cognitive processing therapy. This study looked at a new approach called written exposure therapy that I'm going to introduce you to today and give you my version of it for struggles rather than just traumas. But I want to point out here how effective this is. First of all, cognitive processing therapy takes 12 sessions to get the results. With written exposure therapy, it takes 5. Written exposure therapy takes 40 minutes, oftentimes shorter, and the version I'm going to teach you is shorter, versus 90 minutes. With written exposure therapy, there's no homework, whereas with cognitive processing therapy, there is. And there is a 40% dropout rate when doing the traditional PTSD treatment of journaling, this kind of cognitive processing therapy, versus a 6% dropout rate for written exposure therapy. Now, why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this is because if this works for something intransigent and difficult as PTSD, it is definitely going to work for people going through less severe struggles, fears, failures, and difficulties. And so how do you do this? This is the way that it's done. It's a 3-part process, and it follows the feel, deal, heal that we would have done if this was a physical pain that we never learned as a psychological, mental, emotional suffering piece. And so this is how you feel, deal, and heal. First of all, what you're going to do is you're going to write what happened. But you're not just going to write what happened in terms of a narrative. What most people do is they'll be like, well, I got in my car, I was going to go get a bagel, I got in the car, put it in drive, went down the street, made a right, made a left, and all of a sudden I got hit by a car, and this happened and that happened. It's a very narrative, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, X, Y, Z type of description. That's not what we want to do here. What we want to do is, I was driving down the street, I got hit by a car, and I felt, bam, this is what I felt. And I smelled this, and I smelled gasoline, and my eyes were watering, and my body was in immediate pain, and I had this shivering fear go through my whole body. And we describe what the feeling was in the same way that when a knife cuts our finger, we feel the feeling so that we can grab the finger. Here, what we want to do is relive the feeling so we can understand where this emotion resides. And a shortcut to doing this is to give this emotion personality, and to give it temperature, and to give it texture, and to relate where it is in the body. For example, you get in this car accident and you can say, I felt it in my chest, and I feel it in my chest. And it's this shivering, lightning feeling of, immediate doom. And it's kind of angry, and it's hot, and it's sticky. And it feels like, this sticky sort of sandpaper-ish, and it's, maroon, and it feels like fear. And so we're giving it this sort of metaphorical, symbolic description. It is very important to keep in mind when we're dealing with the emotional body and the unconscious mind, that the unconscious mind does not think in language and logic. It thinks in symbol, it thinks in metaphor, it thinks in descriptive terms. And so as you write this narrative, you want to think in symbol, think in metaphor. More importantly, you want to think in descriptive terms. Give it temperature, give it texture, give it personality, give it location in the body. This is you feeling the cut thumb. This is you feeling the psychological injury and calling it back up. Now, the second part of this is the deal phase. This thing that happened, this fear you confronted, this struggle you had, this difficulty you were dealing with, what did you make it mean about the world? What did you tell? What story did you tell yourself about the world? So let's say, this comes from a direct client of mine who was young and remembers her dad yelling at her because she wanted to play hockey with her older brothers. And he yelled at her and said, "What are you doing? Hockey is not for girls. Hockey is for boys." And it made her feel less than, and it felt like she was left out, and it felt like she was incapable, and it felt like she was not included, and it felt like she was being put in her place. And where did she feel that? Well, she felt it in her solar plexus and heart. She felt it in her throat. It was like a lump that went all the way from her throat down to her solar plexus. And it was sticky, and it was maroon in color, and it was stuck there and wouldn't come up, and felt like, her heart was crying. And she wrote a decision that I am no good at sports, that sports are not for me. And then that followed her around, and she tended to be overweight, and she wasn't very active in her life. Can we see what happens here? So this second part is the misguided unconscious decision that you write to understand, what did I tell myself? And by the way, how do we uncover this? Because we see our patterns and we see our fears. We will be very clear on the things that keep coming up over and over and over again here. And then the final step is, now we write into the future. We give this struggle, this difficulty, plot and purpose. This is the heal phase. We write a story. We essentially say, as a result of this struggle, as a result of this betrayal, as a result of this fear, as a result of this failure, I learned this lesson, and I learned that lesson, and I became this. This is like you playing the director and producer of a movie and writing into the future and essentially saying, this was the plot and this was the purpose. This is the reason why I dealt with this story. And you do this 5 times. You can do it 5 times once per day. You could do it once per week over 5 weeks. And each time you do it, you are feeling, dealing, and healing. And the unconscious mind is beginning to unravel that knot of yarn. You do this over and over until the perception changes. And the first time you do it, you spend 10 minutes. You just take out your mobile device, you hit 10 minutes on a timer, and that's, you do 10 minutes part 1, writing about the feeling. What did this feel like? Temperature, texture, symbolism, metaphor, all that stuff. Once that 10 minutes is up, you take 5 minutes to write about the story you wrote. Once that 5 minutes is up, you take another 5 minutes to write about the heal phase and what your future self will do with it. And you write about that future self as if it is already occurring. And then every time you do this again, you decrease part 1 and increase part 3. So the second time is 9 minutes, 4 minutes, and 7 minutes. The next time is 8 minutes, 3 and 9, and 7, 2, and 11, and then 6, 1, and 13. So that slowly but surely we are writing the new narrative. This works exceptionally well with people to rewrite their identity and the stories reinforcing it. And then finally, you spend most of your time on the heal phase. This rewires the brain. Now, what about the meditation piece, step 2 of this? Well, there's different types of meditation. And so down here in the lower left, this would be, in my mind, the typical mindfulness meditation that we're all used to. Watching thoughts pass by like clouds in the sky, focusing on our breath in and out. This is not really the type of meditation that is going to be most powerful for this identity restructuring, but rather these other two will be. This one up here in the left, top left, is what I would call visualization meditation. This is where you go into the meditation and you begin to visualize your healed next level human self and see yourself living out that story that you wrote about in the written exposure therapy, living out the heal phase, seeing yourself grow and enrich others and create and matter and make a difference, seeing your life show up exactly as you want it to be, and actually trying to get into the feeling so that it feels exactly like you already have the thing that you are trying to get. And of course, there's another type of meditation which would be best described as void meditation, where you essentially, or nothingness meditation, where you essentially go into meditation and you try to distance yourself from yourself, almost dissociating from your old identity and basically moving into what many meditators would call the void space, a space that you are aware you are you, but you're not quite you. You're you and you're everyone else. You're no one and you're someone. You are where you are, but everywhere else. And this type of meditation starts to teach your mind to distance itself from its old stories and its old feelings and its old narratives and its old habits and behaviors. Most importantly, when you do these meditations, is to immerse yourself in the feelings that you want to feel that represent your healed self. Think of this as dress rehearsal for your emotional body. If you're stuck in one of those emotions of afraid, what we are essentially doing is we are essentially saying we're going to try on a new emotion. Or if you're stuck in an old identity, what we're essentially saying is we're going to practice distancing ourselves from that identity. And slowly but surely, you begin to learn a new emotional feeling and you begin to dissociate from the old identity that had the old stories, the old beliefs, and the old habits and behaviors. And so that's part two. So first we go through this written exposure therapy type of approach. Then we kind of get into this meditative daily meditation, practicing this new feeling. And then most importantly, and the last step, we begin to take action. Now, right here, I want to talk about a pervasive and I think very wrong saying in the personal development space. Fake it until you make it. Well, from my perspective, faking simply will not do to rewrite the unconscious brain. Faking means that when people are watching you, you're doing the thing. And when people aren't watching, you go right back to doing all the old habits and behaviors. The brain does not change that way. The unconscious mind does not change that way. The better way to think of this is be it until you see it. And what exactly is being? Being is alignment in thinking, feeling, choosing, and acting. When you are being something, you're being it when people are watching, but more importantly, you're being the thing when no one is watching at all, when only you are watching. You be it until you see it, whether someone's watching, and more importantly, when they are not watching. You do not fake it till you make it. Now, how do you do this? Well, the best way to think about this is acting as if. Like I said, the brain needs to be thinking, feeling, choosing, and acting in alignment. It needs to be doing all of these things. And what research shows, believe it or not, is that action, taking action in the world, is probably the shortest path to being. So we tend to think in terms of law of attraction, think the thing. And certainly that can work, but it works more pervasively and deeper when you just act it out and try it on. Now, the way to think about this is to think about two different types of actors. We're all familiar with the actor who gets a role and then studies for the role and studies their lines. And when the director says action, they go into the role. And when the director says cut, they stop playing the role. That's like faking it until you make it. That's not going to work for what we're trying to do in restructuring our identity. Instead, we want to be the method actor, this person here on the right who studies, who understands, who once they get the role, they start playing the role immediately. And they keep playing the role. When the director says, action, they're already playing the role. And when the director says cut, they keep on playing the role. So think about when you wake up to dress yourself in a wardrobe of thoughts and feelings and choices and actions. You play the method actor. You play the person who manages and earns and saves money. And you study that and you live that. You play the person who's a healthy, fit, active individual. You play the person who's a great communicator in their relationships. You play the person and the role that has meaning and has a power and purpose in their lives. And you start playing the role and you don't ever stop playing the role. And when you add this to changing the thoughts through written exposure therapy, clearing all those old stories, practicing the new feeling, and then taking action in the world, magic begins to happen. Now, I want to show you how powerful this is. This is a study right here of individuals who have arachnophobia, severe arachnophobia, fear of spiders. And in a 2-hour treatment through exposure to spiders, most of these individuals actually ended up holding a tarantula. And what they did was slowly expose them to the spider. First, they watched a documentary on the spider. Then they learned some unique facts about the spider. Then they were brought into a room where the spider was in an aquarium behind glass. Then they were in the room where the top of the aquarium was taken off. And then they touched the spider with a stick. And before you know it, they were holding the spider. And what this is doing is this is reprogramming the brain, showing the brain the possibilities of a new reality. So how do we do this in real life? I call it the fear PR, a concept I have borrowed from the conditioning world. A PR is a personal record. So if I can deadlift 500 pounds, my PR attempt might be at 510. So I'm always trying to get a little bit more. I'm trying to get a personal record. Well, in the personal development space, we can use the same concepts around fears. We start with any fear, we make it easy and simple, and then we slowly increase the difficulty until we attack the next fear. So let's take fear of being alone, for example, a simple example. We have someone who's afraid to be alone. Fear PR level 1 might be going to a movie and taking that on. Why would this be a level 1? Because we all know it's a little apprehensive buying the ticket, but once you sit down and watch the movie, you'll be distracted, and then you might be a little apprehensive leaving the movie. It's a pretty easy way of being alone. Fear PR level 2 might be go out to dinner by yourself. Fear PR level 3 might be go out to dinner by yourself without your phone. And of course, we could take this all the way to the extreme, fear PR level 100, let's say, where you go to France, you do not speak the language by yourself, and you stay there for 2 weeks. Imagine what this does to the brain. It treats you as if you are a different person because you are. You are slowly but surely taking this on. We could do the same thing with fear of sharks, which happens to be one of my fears and one of the fear PRs I've been taking on over the last few years. Fear PR level 1 might be swimming in a pool. Fear PR level 3 might be swimming in the surf. Fear PR level 5 might be going out 200 yards on a boat and jumping in the water past the surf. Fear PR level 100 might be I've learned scuba diving and now I am diving around sharks in a cage. And can we see how this would change everything? And so when we begin to restructure our identity, we must follow this 3-step process. If we don't clear the old wounds, the old struggles, the old difficulties, the misguided unconscious decisions, no amount of meditation, no amount of doing is going to clear that, because we'll keep falling back to those erroneous beliefs. So we need written exposure therapy. Then we need to train our brains in the new feeling. This is where the meditative practices and some very popular meditative practices from, in personal development seminars come in, but they're not going to be effective unless you clear the old misguided unconscious decisions. And then finally, and arguably most important, we must take action in the real world. And to me, this is what we should be doing to restructure our identity and our beliefs rather than just attacking habits and behaviors. So I'm going to stop there, see if you have any questions about this. And I appreciate you letting me show you this new model of change, which I can tell you clinically is incredibly powerful and will move you from not being able to change to being able to make significant change in your life.
Jade, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria.
I also think it was just so clear that we might not even have questions come in because you answered them all, at least for me. We'll keep an eye on the chat if anyone wants to pipe up or ask Jade any questions. We've got a couple extra minutes here, so you've got some time. Maybe we could get our hands on a couple resources if anyone wanted to dive in a little deeper. I know I'm a listener of your podcast. Maybe there's an episode in particular you could guide them towards.
Yep, absolutely. So you can go to the Next Level Human podcast, and there's an episode called Identity Restructuring. I also am doing many events called the Journey event, the Awakening event, that walk people through this process of restructuring their identity and beginning to deal with their old stories. And so those resources all are available to you. I also did just put out a book. It's a romance book, but it delivers this entire concept through the lens of romance. So for some of you who are dealing with romantic difficulties and repeated patterns and struggles in that area, you can check out that book called You Grow Me.
It's really helpful. I'm going to add this to the email for everyone getting the recording so we can get our hands on those resources from Jade. Gina and Jill, if you're able to see the chat, I think we have some people posting questions or looking to get into the chat here.
I do see one, Jade, that was amazing. There's a couple in here. One would be, how would a coach start with its clients on this? But I actually want to take another one before I take this one. I'm wondering if you think that some coaches might have issues getting results or challenges getting results with clients. And it could be coaches, practitioners, leaders, etc., because they first need to do this work on themselves. Just wondering your thought on that.
Yes, I think that ultimately our personal development always comes first. And so I think there's always a strong, sort of argument to be made that we should be doing our work, because as we learn our lessons, we are more in tune with helping other people address theirs. And so I definitely think that's the case. And I'll say something here that I might get in trouble for, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's important. In my opinion, the coaching industry as a whole is a difficult industry to be in. You know, I get asked all the time, hey, Jade, what do you do for a living when I meet someone new? And I tell them, I'm in physical and personal transformation. And they say, what's that like? What's it like in that line of business? And I say, well, if you want to not get results most of the time, you have a good idea of what I do, because it is very difficult to get people's results for many reasons. Part of the reason I came to this work is because I got tired of saying that getting people results in physical transformation and in psychological transformation is incredibly difficult. And my research and my work has gone here for that particular reason, that I don't think coaches, myself included, were trained very well in any of this. What we're trained in is habits and behaviors. And we have to wake up to the fact that that is the least effective way to make change in people's lives. Despite all the books written on habits and behavior change, the real way we need to do this is through changing identity. It's the only way it works. And so, yes, I think coaches should be doing their own work here. I also can say without reservation that this is the training that coaches are missing that is keeping them from getting results with their clients.
Yeah, I think this is going to break a lot of issues with results wide open for a lot of coaches. And, we've already shouted out Jade's podcast, but if this is your first time being exposed to this kind of work, we definitely recommend diving further into his podcast. You can check him out on Instagram. I saw that question come in. It's at Jade Teta. You guys definitely got to follow along with his work, and even as he mentioned, this book that he just released. And you know, as he mentioned, we're all the front line here, so the change and the difference starts with us. So we have to do the work ourselves in order to then pass it on and pass the baton, like Jill says infamously. So I'm sure we have a lot of coaches here, a lot of people that are going to be tuning into your podcast, Jade, and moving into this 3-step method that you shared. That's really, really helpful. I hope everyone took notes today.
Jade, I just want to acknowledge you for doing like industry legacy work. You know, some of us in this industry, we start on one thing and we get really good at it and we stay on that one thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can change lives, you can do good work, but it's been really cool to watch your journey and be able to continue to learn from you on so many levels. And you know, this is industry legacy work that you're sharing here, just because of the how far back this goes, and more importantly, what you taught us, how far forward it can go. So super cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jill, so much, and thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Gina, and thank you for everyone else who has who's listening. I appreciate you very much, and really appreciate the time and the ability to present. So
thanks,
very happy to
Jade.
be with you.
Just before we go, I did notice we have a couple of questions here. First one from Ryan. What was the first book that Jill referenced about metabolism, and what was the inspiration behind writing the book?
That first book is a book called The Metabolic Effect Diet. It was written back in 2010. It still has some utility, but I have updated that book plus a lot more in a book I put out in 2022 called Next Level Metabolism, that goes through all of my metabolism work since 2010. That would be the book that I would recommend. And the idea is that for me anyway, you know, we all have our purposes, and purpose can evolve. And I have slowly but surely evolved from healer, which I still am, to more teacher. And so that's the point of the books that I put out, is that it's an interesting, I have a knack for putting books together. Not everyone wants to do that work, and I'm not saying that everyone even should, but the idea for me is that I like to have my work all in one place, and have it for people to learn. So if you're someone listening to this and you're like, you know, I want to get your metabolism work, Next Level Metabolism is probably the book that I would recommend. And if you're someone who is interested in sort of the psychological stuff, check out my podcast, Next Level Human Podcast, and some of the new books that I put out in recent years, Human 365, Tribe, You Grow Me, and a new one that's coming out with a funny title called Antidote to Asshole. It's all about being in your purpose. And so I love this work, and I love doing books.
Amazing. Great answers too. I feel like I've been jotting these notes down for myself to really dive into. We have another question here from Andrew. He's wondering, would you include this in an intake process? I'm a personal trainer and wondering how to apply this with my clients. I've had people start with me and get great results, and other people that get no results on the same program. It's not until later that we uncover some limiting beliefs. He's wondering, how would you recommend figuring that out in the beginning instead of after 3 months or 6 months or over an extended amount of time?
Yeah, Andrew, you're thinking about it the correct way. I would literally add a question to your intake, and that question would go something like this. It would say, we often don't think about other areas of our lives that have direct impact in our health and fitness endeavors. What are the repeated patterns, stuck emotions, recurrent obstacles that you have seen in your life in health and fitness, finance, personal relationships, and in your sense of purpose and meaning? Those are the 4 jobs that every human must do, by the way. We all have a job to do. In fact, we have 4 jobs. The first one is we must earn and manage a living. Even people who live out on the street have to procure food and shelter. We must attain and maintain health and fitness. We must give and receive love, you know, personal relationships. We have to manage those. We also must look after our personal development. And so a question that looks at the patterns inside of those 4 jobs And one of the things you also could do if you want to extend this in your intake form is just ask people on a scale from 1 to 10, how well are they doing their finance job, their health and fitness job, their personal relationship job, and their purpose and meaning job. And what you're usually going to find is a discrepancy somewhere, right? Maybe they're getting a 10 in finance, they're getting a 4 in health and fitness, which is why they're seeing you, and they're getting a 2 in personal relationships. And then you can ask as a follow-up to that, what are the recurrent obstacles, repeated patterns, stuck emotions? And of course, as a personal trainer, one of the beautiful things about being a personal trainer is you're engaging in dialogue with your clients constantly, right? And so you're hearing their stories all the time. And so one of the more powerful ways to do this is very subtly asking people questions around these 4 jobs. One of the things that a great coach is at their core is a pattern spotter. They spot the patterns that are keeping other people stuck. And think about it, right? This is one of the things about being human. We are very good at spotting other people's patterns. We suck at spotting our own. And this is just the nature of being a human. So as a coach, as a personal trainer, as a healthcare provider, all you need to do is set in your mind that I am looking for the patterns that are keeping these people stuck. And you'll hear it all the time. I'm no good at that. I always mess up. I always cheat on my diet. I'm not this. I am that. People are using language like that all the time. So as a trainer, just as you're carrying around your clipboard and taking notes, you hear that stuff, you write it down, and you begin to see where these issues are. And then you start dropping breadcrumbs around these beliefs. And then you're training their body, but you start to see their patterns, and you start to have most of your conversations in between sets and everything else revolve around these repeated patterns, recurrent obstacles, and stuck emotions. And you can make a huge difference that way. One of the reasons I loved personal training and did it for so long, even when I was in the clinic as a doctor, is because I could have a different conversation and a different relationship and make more headway into the psychological aspects of my clients. And so you are in the perfect position to coach when you're personal training, if you're aware of it and you go in with intention. So to me, it's very simple. Just spot the patterns and then ask them the penetrating questions that help them spot the patterns. And once you do that, you're moving them along the way. And then you can use things like written exposure therapy as homework. You can include meditation as homework, and you can give fear PRs as homework. And this goes for all health and fitness professionals. I chose these 3 tools. There's many more, but these 3 tools are very powerful because they can be delivered as homework and are very short, and they're also usually pretty enjoyable for the client.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Jade. Andrew, also, thank you. And Drew Christensen, thank you as well for coming out. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to pop them into the questions panel. If nothing else, you can always send us a DM to our Instagram. You can also DM Jade Teta, and we'll be happy to address any questions you might have after.
Thank you so much, Jade, for your time today. This is incredible.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Jill. Really appreciate everyone. And thank you for everyone for coming on.
All right, take care, everyone. Happy Monday.
Bye, everybody.